Hello and welcome back to the panel political discussion show that is big, that is beautiful, but it's also bountiful, beneficent, and a little bing bong, not even mad. Today we speak of Biden, the diminishment, the diagnosis, the alleged dementia, and the discussion thereof. Plus, Donald Trump does away with foreign policy niceties like adherence to human rights or really any standards at all. We're all better off, right? And we do so, as we promise, to uphold our reputation for refutation, while at the same time vowing to be not even mad. I use the pronoun we. Who are we? Well, one of the we is Eli Lake, the host of the excellent Breaking History podcast series from the Free Press, a veteran with expertise in foreign affairs and national security. But how do you like it? How do you like being primarily ID'd as a podcast host, Eli?
I love it because I love podcasts, but I do write a bit. Still write a column and a lot for the Free Press, we should say.
I know you do. I just took your ID directly from the site, and they're elevating the podcast thing.
We love it. Yeah.
Michael A. Cohen is a columnist for MSNBC. He writes the Truth and Consequences newsletter. He's a senior fellow at the Fletcher School at Tufts. I don't know, maybe one day a podcast or two, an aspiration of yours, Cohen?
It is an aspiration of mine. Yes, it is. Someday we hope. I hope.
I didn't know about the Fletcher, so Mazel Tov, Michael.
Thank you.
Mazel Tov on the Fletcher School.
Thank you.
So as I went to the New York Times today, they have one of those, I guess you'd call it crawl at the top of the page. And the topic was Joe Biden. And the subtopics were prostate cancer, memory lapses, cognitive test. This is not good for Joe Biden, who did get a cancer diagnosis, or at least revealed a cancer diagnosis in the last 2 days, as Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper's new book, Original Sin is Everywhere. I'll give you a quote from that New York Times article. It's from, let's play this game. See if you could name who said it. Donald Trump isn't shy about corruption, but what's so troubling is that what the people around Joe Biden clearly were doing was in some ways more egregious. I don't know if you read the article, but Michael, Eli, do you know who said it?
No.
Want to guess?
No.
Dean Phillips. It was Dean Phillips, the Sophocles, the Diogenes holding a lantern for
That
Joe
is a good
Biden.
example of how insane the discourse has gotten on this issue about Joe Biden.
And this is where I want to go to. So you, Michael A. Cohen, wrote an excellent post on Truth and Consequences. How annoyed am I by the coverage of Joe Biden's health? And in that post, you correctly point to certain assertions that go way too far, such as the idea that Joe Biden's diminishment was not just the most important factor in the 2024 election, but the sole defining reason for Trump's victory. I'll give you that point. That's overstated. But there
you think that's overstated?
Yes, a little bit.
I want to be clear that Tapper and Thompson say that his health, him staying in the race, guaranteed Donald Trump's victory. That's what they say.
Well, that was a review of the book.
No,
but I'll read.
They say they use the word guarantee in the New Yorker piece they published this past week.
Yeah, I think I pretty much co-sign, other than the fact that the future is unknowable. That seems plausible to me. But I'll read you to you.
Guarantee.
I think that.
How could they possibly know that?
Sure, but I think let me just read you to you.
Sorry.
I would say as far as that goes, using the standard definition of guarantee, the strict dictionary definition, no. The way guarantee is used by a lot of people in daily life, I think it's close to accurate. But you're right. We're still waiting for anyone to point out where Joe Biden had to make a presidential decision or make a presidential address where he was unable to do his job because of mental decline. Not the address, but the decision. But Michael, isn't the point we don't know? And it's quite plausible. We might never know, but it's quite plausible. The answer was yes, that did happen.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the evidence of it.
It doesn't worry you?
I'm sorry?
It doesn't worry you that the answer is plausibly yes?
It doesn't worry you that might have happened? I mean, if I see evidence of it, it would worry me. But as my point that I keep sort of making here is that I am much more worried about the current occupant of the White House, who has clearly far worse cognitive deficiencies than Joe Biden ever had. And one of the points I made in that piece was that Joe Biden had a terrible debate. No doubt in my mind about that one. Joe Biden should not have run for re-election. I was the first to argue that, considering clearly what we know now about some of the problems he was having, at his age, he shouldn't have run. When I look at this and I say at the same time, there was plenty of reason to believe that Joe Biden could handle the rigors of being president. In March of 2024, gave a fantastic State of the Union address in which many pundits who now take it for granted that Biden was unable to do his job said he appears to be able to do his job. Weeks after he gave that terrible debate performance, he did a press conference, July 14th, at the NATO summit, spent 49 minutes, solo press conference, answered questions cogently, coherently, in a way that Donald Trump simply could never do. And again, I get this point, if you keep looking at what Trump is saying and doing now as president, it is much more terrifying. This didn't get any coverage at all. But on Friday last week, he was in Qatar at a business roundtable. He gave a 27-minute opening statement to a press conference, a rambling, incoherent, disjointed narrative that I went over. He makes no sense whatsoever, and demonstrates, I mean, to me, evidence of dementia on the part of Trump. I mean, certainly this kind of disjointed, incoherent narrative, which he sort of skates from idea to idea, is considered a symptom of dementia. And I don't know why we're not talking about that. Why we're focusing on a president who's not even president, who didn't even run for re-election, who dropped out of the race in July. I just find this whole conversation about Biden sort of borderline insane. And the only reason that we're talking about it is because Jake Tapper and Alec Thompson want to sell a book.
Eli.
Wow. Well, I mean, let me just say, I think the reason why this still resonates as a scandal is because since 1945, or really you could say since the beginning of World War II, the American presidency has become incredibly powerful. We elect one person, and over the last, 8 decades or so, that one person has gotten enormous amount of power over our lives, war and peace, and everything else, as the norms and sort of the balance between the branches of government has kind of gone out of whack in favor of the executive branch. So it matters if the president, is only like kind of all there for, a portion of the day because it's a 24-hour job. Second of all, you can say that, Trump, sometimes speaks in jumbled phrases. You can say that he doesn't know things. All of that is fair. But you can't really say that the voters weren't getting it. Like they knew that's who he was. It's who he's been. And more importantly, do you really doubt that that Donald Trump is in charge of his administration? I mean,
yes,
he
I
fires
100%
people
doubt that.
all the time, Michael. He fires people all the time.
Doubt.
If I cover this administration, everybody sort of knows that it comes down to like what Trump thinks. I really have serious doubts whether Joe Biden was in charge of his own administration. And so all of these questions about his prostate cancer, his dementia, and everything else are just really a way of saying who was running the government under Joe Biden, or at least who was running the government under Joe Biden when Joe Biden clearly wasn't capable. And we saw it during the debate most obviously, but now in this book from Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper, we're getting all these amazing anecdotes, like he couldn't recognize George Clooney, who he knew. I mean, he's a celebrity. There's all these things that say to yourself, wait a second, was this just like a weekend at Bernie's presidency, in that a lot of the time, the guy who is supposed to be constitutionally in charge, the most powerful person in the world, was in fact not all there. So who was it? Was it Jill? Was it Jake Sullivan? Who was really running the government? And that is a totally fair question, given now not only what's coming out now in books like this, but kind of like what we were seeing at the time. And the other part of this, I just think it's really important to sort of underline, is that it's like, I don't, like if you want to, I'm against mono causes. So like, elections are complicated things. People have different motivations for voting. But there is something to the fact that like the leadership of the Democratic Party, all these people around Biden were engaged in a massive lie about his fitness
They
for
weren't.
office.
I mean, there's just no evidence.
Have you
of that.
looked back at what
There's
Karine
no
Jean-Pierre
there
said? She's, I can't keep up with him. Do you believe that? You don't? You think a 44-year-old woman can't keep up with Joe Biden? Are you serious? You think he's training for triathlons? Give me a break. This was a total scam.
Eli. Carolyn Levitt said the exact same thing about Donald Trump yesterday.
That she can't keep up with Donald Trump, but I actually think that's true. I think he's like, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's some fucking, I'm sorry, maybe it's some reverse energy thing or whatever, but like.
Eli Lake is losing it. He's cursing.
I'm sorry. The guy is tweeting at all hours of the evening.
Tweeting is not evidence of mental health, Eli, first of all.
I'm not talking about mental health. I'm talking about, is he like aware? Is he there?
She said yesterday he had perfect health, which is insane. He does not have perfect mental health. Okay, you even acknowledged that a second ago. Secondly,
no, I didn't. I said he's got his verbal tics, but I'm not. I don't think he's not in command. I think he knows what he's doing.
I wrote a piece about this a couple of weeks ago where I pointed out that Trump has been asked repeatedly about the case of Kilmar Abreu Garcia, who's been deported to El Salvador, and he has repeatedly stated that his administration won the case in the Supreme Court. He has said this repeatedly. Why?
He lies.
Because Stephen Miller has been saying that. He at an event with the El Salvadoran president, when asked the question, he couldn't answer it and asked Miller to say it. And he has said repeatedly, I would let this guy go free if the Supreme Court ordered me to. The Supreme Court did order him to. He seems completely.
I think it's a disgrace.
He seems
okay, fine. That's a brazen. Lying is actually evidence of like mental acuity. You have to know what you have to.
Unaware that the Supreme Court ruled against him on that case. Okay?
Well, that's good. That's good for anyone who's worried, because I assumed he was just lying and ignoring the Supreme Court. If he's deluded,
he is not.
It's better.
He has said over. I actually think it is better in a weird way. He's not defined the Supreme Court. Stephen Miller's defined the Supreme Court. He's going along with what Miller's telling him to do. He truly seems to believe that that he won the decision, which he didn't, and that he is abiding by the Supreme Court decision, which he is not. Okay.
Yes, except in his life, he has said so many things that are the opposite of reality, and you could make the case that he comes to be convinced that this is reality, or the Occam's razor is he's lying. He's just a liar.
Yeah,
but a lie is an example of a mind that's working.
Spinning in a dangerous, unconstitutional way and lying in a dangerous, unconstitutional way, which is a separate issue. And I'm happy to kind of probably agree with you about that. That's like one of the top things that bothers me. But I'm saying this is different than a guy who is a Roomba on stage when he's like giving public speeches, doesn't know where to walk. This is different than like Joe Biden like not recognizing people. This is different than like Joe Biden shaking someone's phantom hand on stage. That is evidence of somebody who is just not there, losing it.
No, it isn't.
It is.
No, it isn't. And I can tell you an example of this. Go read the transcript. July 14th, 2024, NATO press conference, solo press conference. Read it. Yeah. I invite you to read it and tell me that is a person who doesn't understand the issues he's discussing, because he does. He clearly does.
I'm not denying
that is way more important than not recognizing George Clooney.
Joe Biden didn't have some moments of clarity mixed in with an undetermined percentage of moments of pure senescence. So let's be real, okay? You and I both know, it's like a lot of old people. You hear this all the time. Like, he's got his good days and he's got his bad days. Yeah, okay, the president had some good days, but I want to know about the bad days, and we're learning about the bad days. That's why it's a story, Michael. And there is
what bad days? What bad days are we learning about? We learned about fundraisers. We didn't recognize George Clooney. I read that article in the New Yorker. I found very little evidence in there to back up this idea that Biden was basically catatonic through the second term of his presidency. I don't believe that.
You don't think that he had moments where he was just not there?
Listen,
how about this, Michael?
I'll answer your question.
Donald Trump seems to, he loves talking to the press. He's constantly talking to reporters. He's putting himself out there. Whereas when Joe Biden did it, it was like an event. And when you're talking about like, he had a NATO press conference, I'm like, the reason that was considered such a big deal is because he rarely would allow himself to be put before the press like that. And like, even at that point, the Democrats still had to do the little switcheroo and negate their own party's primary, basically. So I just think I understand you want to talk about, Trump, and there's a lot of flaws there, but I just don't think you can compare the two. Come on.
Flaws?
Wait, let me get in and take the
okay,
Michael.
sorry,
let me get in and take the host prerogative. So first of all, there were many examples beyond George Clooney, and maybe the book is out today on the day we're taping. I've read it. There are dozens of examples in there. The CEO of the Pittsburgh Penguins, who was a guy who worked on the Kerry and the Gore and the Clinton campaign, met him at a fundraiser, was so shocked he began calling everyone he knew in Democratic politics, saying, "This guy is vacant. This guy is not there. This guy told me anecdotes about Kerry that I know didn't happen." Eric Swalwell, to his discredit, and this was actually in the Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen book, at a picnic, talked to Biden. Remember, Swalwell ran against Biden. Swalwell says Biden had no idea who he was. Swalwell does not deny that anecdote. It essentially confirms it, but also ran interference for the Robert Hur testimony, which is another example. That audio was out. It more than matches up with what the transcript indicated, which is maybe he's so extra layers of brilliant that he was doing a run out the clock pretending to be doddering strategy so that the prosecutor couldn't weigh in. So I just want to lay out that, one, many examples of him diminished.
Okay.
Two, the press conference that you cite, which was this great world-spanning moment of presidential triumph. This was the press conference where he was asked in the first or second question, do you stand by Kamala Harris as vice president? And he said, we wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president if I didn't have confidence in her. That was not great. But the third, and this is the biggest thing, all of your answer falls into the category of whataboutism. And I'm willing to concede all of it. I will concede anything you want to say about Donald Trump's intellect or ability. I don't want to even get in that fight. But it is whataboutism. And when the Soviets used whataboutism to blame America, they were using it as a deflection tactic. And the reason in this case it isn't the perfect analogy is that the whataboutism of Donald Trump was caused by Joe Biden's incapacity to pursue the case as a candidate. It would be as if the Soviet Union were there only because the United States made decisions that led to the Soviet Union's existence to enable them to engage in this whataboutism.
So I actually think that I'm going to 2 points on this. I think, first of all, the Biden critics are engaging in much more prevalent version of whataboutism. And you mentioned the Hur testimony, and I was very struck by this, reading the Axios article by Alec Thompson, in which at the end of the article, he does state that for most of this interview, Biden was coherent, Biden was speaking clearly, Biden was making sense. In other words, you just picked out him saying Trump instead of Harris, as if that really matters all that much. When if you ignore the other 48,
when your political life is on the line and you're trying to show that you got all your marbles, it matters a little.
After the debate, it's a much bigger problem. But in a vacuum, I compare that to 49 minutes of speaking coherently about the issues affecting NATO, things that Donald Trump is incapable of talking about in any appreciable way. I don't think that's really relevant. And I think what is happening here, both you and Eli are sort of doing this here, it's like we're dumbing this down because it's Trump. Oh, that's just how Trump is. Trump is like this. No, Trump literally cannot speak coherently about any issue.
Do you think that Trump isn't in charge of his own administration?
Let me finish.
Okay.
Right. This is a man who today, again, said gas prices are $1.99. They're not. They are $3.17. He says this repeatedly. He's told repeatedly it's not true. He says it repeatedly. He has said repeatedly that us doing less trade with China means that we are getting an economic boost for the U.S., which is so clearly untrue.
He's economically illiterate, especially on the trade and the tariff stuff.
So that
totally
seems
agree.
I'm not making I don't care about talking about Biden, but I don't think that it got to be crazy about this. Is this notion that Democrats have to answer for this, as if we are not dealing with a president right now who cannot care the duties of his job. and who is being covered for by his press secretary, by his White House staff, by Republicans in Congress. This is exactly what people are complaining about with Biden is happening right now with Trump, and nobody seems to care about it.
It's not that Biden flubbed a couple words and had some gaffes. It's not that, okay? It's like you and I, you know it when you see it, but it's that vacant sort of look. It's the not knowing where to walk. It's the concealed, I don't believe for a minute that he just learned of advanced prostate cancer. It's all of that.
Well, you don't know that. I mean, you're speculating.
Oh, okay, I don't. But you know what you know why I'm skeptical that that's like of the official story from the Bidens? Because I think they're a bunch of liars. And I'm not saying it out of a partisan reason. I'm saying it because they lied. All right? They lied. I mean, the lying is not just about the acuity of Biden. It was lying about like the family business and Hunter. And then why? I mean, it's all of this stuff. It's like they've frittered away their credibility. And back to the political point, the reason that matters is that the Democrats like ran a campaign of like restoring democracy and like battling the truth decay and all of this stuff. And when they're propping up a guy who's basically like vacant for at least a portion of the day, it seems, then that's a problem, Michael. You don't see that? Like, that's like a huge brand killer. You know, it's like, you know, that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Really, I would say
if you want to say like, oh, you know, Trump lies and he does things and he doesn't understand how economics works. I'm like, I'm with Mike. I'm like, I'm not even going to argue with you, like, because you're probably right about most of that stuff. I'm not going to quibble. My point is that is like,
quibble, but
that's Trump. He won the election. Okay. But the point, the thing about
Joe Biden,
that's the deception.
Joe Biden won all those primaries. So we should just
he won the primaries, and when the party realized there's no way this guy can run.
But by your logic, Eli, you're saying he won the election, and I'm saying you didn't say anything about Biden. Biden ran
but Biden won an election during COVID, hiding in the basement. He won an election.
No. He won first of all, he won the election. It was a fair election. It was the highest turnout.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying.
And in 2024, he ran in the primaries and he won. So to your argument, he won, so we should just say, okay, he won.
He won the election as like an incumbent with the party, basically, as they often do for incumbents, kind of like, you know, talk to Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips has a hell of a story to tell about how they did everything they could to clear the deck, including RFK Jr., who was originally running in the primary as a Democrat. So I'm just saying the party itself got lock, stock behind this guy, Biden, and their brand was restoring democracy. You know, we're the party of like truth and reason and all this other stuff. And then meanwhile, there are like very fair questions about whether he was mentally had the acuity, had the ability to be the president. And I would just point out, and I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong here, the Robert Hur testimony that had those gaps, I believe was October 7th. So that's the time when you want the president. Okay, fine, October 8th. That's like a crisis moment when you want the president to be totally there. Does that give you confidence that he can't remember like when his own son died and he keeps talking about how he died in Iraq and all this other stuff? That's like bananas to me.
I read the section of that in the transcript and I thought it was the grossest thing that I read in a long time. I mean, he clearly was getting emotional talking about his son, which, you know, I understand. But here's the thing about this I also don't understand about this argument.
Well, he got emotional, but he also said, so when was this? 2017, 2018? You have to remember, my son was either deployed or had died then. He was deployed in 2009 and died in 2015. So emotional. The question was, can you tell me when you were living at this address on Rockbridge Road or something like that? And he gets the years wrong by a number of years.
Okay,
maybe this was the most sophisticated tactic to evade prosecution, which he did. Look, I'll give you the last word. I will give you the last word because you're someone who I respect, and also you're saying something that causes my jaw to drop on the ground. And I know you're not doing it because you're a partisan hack. I've heard there are some other people who sometimes go on these talk shows who are essentially, hey, say the ideal Democratic Party line line, and they will. You really believe this. So maybe it's the case that, I don't know, maybe Raymond Shaw was the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being that the guys had ever known in their life. But you do sound a little like the Manchurian Candidate when you're still propagating the line that there was nothing, absolutely nothing to see here. I'm a little worried how the media
I didn't say that. I didn't say anything wrong here. And here's the thing that I find sort of amazing about some of this commentary. When it became apparent to Democrats across the country at the debate, June 28th, that Biden could no longer do the job of president, the party basically organized itself and said he needs to go. Well, I mean, with a lot of back and forth on that. But they did. I mean, I think one thing that's sort of missing from this is it obviously wasn't apparent to every Democrat that Joe Biden couldn't do this job. But when it became apparent, a lot of Democrats said, we need to get rid of him. And they did.
Are you saying they were wrong then? They jumped to a conclusion? They weren't basing it on substance? They were just basing it on a performance? An outlier performance?
Look, my initial thought was that it was a mistake. My initial thought, I'll be honest with you, it was a mistake after the debate to leave because I didn't know that Harris could run a good enough campaign to win, and I thought for sure she'd be the nominee. But as it became clear, as days went on, it became clear that he had lost the confidence of the party and of the press and of the voters, and that everything he did was going to be seen through the lens of his health. It became apparent he had to drop out, and I wrote a piece saying he needs to drop out of the race. I mean, I think it was Democrats coming to a recognition that this is a crisis and we can't run with this guy, and they didn't run with him. They did push him out. Donald Trump continues to do things that are irrational, that are unconstitutional, that are illegal. And Republicans not only don't criticize him for it, they defend him for it. So I just find the double standard here in how we talk about these two candidates, talk about the two parties, is just kind of insane. I mean, Trump could throw feces at reporters and Republicans would defend him. And Democrats would never do that. In fact, they didn't do that. They actually pushed for Biden to get out of the race, which he did.
I think it depends on the reporters in that case. No.
Yeah, it also Sherry Redstone might side with the feces throwing as well, right. And fire someone.
Fair point.
In a moment, we will be back to talk about foreign affairs, but first, I have to tell you that the average gasoline price in Sunflower County, Mississippi, is $2.48. $2.48. Drive to Sunflower. Back in a minute with more of Not Even Mad. Good. Excellent. Spirited. Here we go. Yes,
we're back. It's still 49 cents more than what he says gas costs right now, just for the record.
We're back with Not Even Mad. We're joined by Eli Lake of the Free Press and Michael Cohen of a little bit of MSNBC, but also of himself. America is no longer going to hector its allies about whether women have the right to drive or whether dissidents disappear into dark prisons. This was a subtitle of an Eli Lake piece in the Free Press. And what had happened was Donald Trump had traveled overseas and made it clear that we don't care about all this moral posturing. So, Eli, let me ask you this. Let us assume an amoral posture. No shining city on the hill, no indispensable nation, no beacon of liberty, none of that stuff, right? It was all a lie. It was all hypocrisy. It all cost too much money. Just on a purely realpolitik assessment, is the U.S. in its new amoral, we don't care about hacking off the limbs of journalists, in its new amoral posture, is the United States under Donald Trump getting the realpolitik right, just defined by our own self-interests?
Well, this gets back to like one of my favorite expressions. I think it's in the great novel Scoop by Evelyn Waugh, but it's also like an idea that it's like some of these critiques to a point. So if you wish to say it was a mistake to invade Iraq and then impose our advanced democratic ideals on a society that really wasn't ready for it, and that kind of thing doesn't really work, I would even agree, and I'm like the big neocon. But if you look at what they've done in terms of policy in that speech, it goes way too far in my view. Like, for example, like they wanted to, and they finally restored the funding for the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment for Democracy does not impose American values on authoritarian countries. The people in those countries that share our values go to the National Endowment for Democracy and say, hey, could you help us out? That to me is totally different than Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's one. Point two, one of the things that really, grinds my gears and got my goat and grind my goat and all that was
for
that he
being on brand,
said, like, you guys in Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, you did it on your own, and you built these gleaming towers in these beautiful cities. And I'm like, you know what? Like, if America wasn't there to destroy the ISIS caliphate, or if America hadn't been there to try to, like, at least, like, you know, just like in the war on terror, or for that matter, in the first Iraq war, so that, you know, Saddam Hussein didn't swallow Kuwait, then you would not have had the security with which to invest in your own cities and build this infrastructure. So yes, congratulations for, you know, using your resources and trying to modernize and all of that. But that was like underwritten by American power. And for Trump not to understand the connection between those things, I think is kind of an infamy against you know, America in the world and like the legacy of like of his predecessors. So there, and that's, by the way, both parties. It's not, I'm not just talking about the Republicans. I'm talking about like both parties were part of this. And it's also kind of weird to me that, you know, I have my issues with the European Union. I have my issues with the excessive. I mean, I think that in Germany, they are out of whack on free speech. But on the other hand, you send J.D. Vance and members of your cabinet like Pete Hegseth to basically trash NATO, which, you know, is a formal alliance. And we don't have anything like that in the Middle East. And it's like nothing but hugs and kisses. And it just so happens that it's hugs and kisses for what are basically, I mean, I do think Saudi Arabia is reforming in a good way, but it's like these are, you know, police states. These are, you know, monarchies. And there is something that feels out of character with America's like great tradition of rebellion against monarchies and embracing constitutional republics. So that's where I'm at. To a point, like, 'cause if you just want to say, hey, it was really over the top what you were trying to do in Afghanistan, that was a fool's errand. Like, what were you thinking there? Fine. If you are going to say, we don't want to ever talk about democracy in the world again, I don't even think that's even keeping with like an American character, and I got a real issue with it.
I think alliances pay dividends. I'm not sure if Trump rejects that or is an operator and just takes advantage of, takes for granted the dividends that they pay. You know, thinking, look, they'll be there for us and some other president maybe will have to do the work of making the dividends pay off. I'm going to reap the rewards. I really don't know what he thinks about that. I don't like it either way.
If President Trump was like, I don't know, the leader of, you know, I don't know, China or something like that in the 11th century, he'd be like, Genghis Khan, tough cookie, you know, really tough negotiator, tough guy.
Exactly
Genghis Khan, you know, he's a serious guy, but he's a softie. It is like, you know,
loves his kids.
So can I just say, for the record, I think he 100% rejects alliances because he thinks that the U.S. is being taken advantage of. I mean, that is exactly his view about NATO, and he's wrong. He's wrong.
Well, it's also complicated because we have formal alliances with the exact kind of countries that he hates culturally, right? We don't really have, I mean, there are organizations of petroleum exporting countries, right? But we're not in that alliance. So the alliances that we have with Middle Eastern states aren't as formal with NATO.
Right.
No, they're not. But can I say one thing, actually, and this is going to be a surprising statement I'm going to make here, but I think one part of this trip he took to the Middle East deserves actually some praise, and that is his embrace of the new leader of Syria, which I thought was the smart political and diplomatic move of the U.S. to give support to this new leader who seems to be doing and saying the right things, and I think probably, you know, helps put Syria on a better path because it has U.S. support. I know there are people inside his administration who are opposed to this. I know that there were some crazy stories about how their people inside the administration are trying to undermine this guy at the same time that Trump is meeting with him. I think on that account, he actually deserves some credit. I'm going to make something else that might seem surprising. I kind of think the way he's dealt with Netanyahu in Israel is probably the right approach as well, which is to basically give him the cold shoulder. And I think in the sense that I think that this administration clearly wants to see progress toward ending the war, and Netanyahu is not going to do that unless pressure is put on him, and this was clearly an effort to put pressure on him. Having said that, the stuff he's doing on Iran, I almost find comical because he's literally moving forward to getting a nuclear deal that's the exact deal that he did away with 7 years ago.
Well, the latest line from Trump and Witkoff suggests that we're not probably going to get a nuclear deal. Which,
well,
by the way,
look,
hallelujah.
I don't think I actually didn't think we were, but if we do get a deal, it's going to look very similar to the one he rejected.
No, but he's saying
never
now
should have
that
rejected.
there can be no enrichment, and that's been
Yes.
repeated.
Witkoff says the red line is enrichment. I'm like, well, that's the entire thing.
Well, I
isn't
know,
it?
I
The
understand.
only
We all
reason
know
they're
who
trying to get the uranium.
follow it and like, okay, well, if there's no
uranium
enrichment,
doesn't really
then what are the
interest them,
Iranians
yeah.
doing at this point?
Exactly.
And like maybe the thinking is they don't have an air defense system because the Israelis took it out a few months back, and like and they don't have the same proxy network with Hezbollah and Hamas because of Israel as well. So maybe like they're really up against it and their economy's collapsing, and maybe they'll make a deal that they wouldn't have made before. But I'm not sure that that's in the cards. So we'll see what happens with that. On the Syria thing, here's my concern. I'm of two minds about it. I'm glad Assad is gone. I only wish he was in a dock right now facing justice for the many crimes he's committed against the Syrian people.
Instead of
the
a
region.
daca.
Yeah, there
Dacha.
you good joke.
Great.
Like,
But
stuff
there
right
needs to be, I just would hope that there is at least some active diplomacy and leverage on Jelani to make sure that either the people under him do not conduct these kind of reprisals against the Syrian minorities that were aligned with Assad. So, and we've seen that, by the way, in the aftermath of the revolution. Good thing Assad is gone, but there is something that America can do in terms of trying to bring this broken country and reconstruct it into like the international system, which clearly Jelani wants. But there should be some kind of guarantees. Like, my concern is not that he lifted the sanctions. What did he get for lifting the sanctions? Did he get a promise? Did he get something to make sure that there will not be, a kind of, that you won't see the Iranization of this new government. You won't see an Islamic republic that goes after these minorities and so forth. That to me is an important thing. I hope that there is somebody working on that, but I don't trust Jelani on his word. So what's the leverage? How are you going to do the trust but verify?
Right. Look, we've all done things in our past, right? I had my goth period. I think Michael Cohen followed Fish for a while. Jelani was in ISIS.
Yeah,
it
sometimes,
happens, right?
Sometimes you
OnlyFans.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do what you got. So,
The OnlyFans is a different conversation, but the fish thing that
maybe
never,
the Jelani
never.
and the jihadists, and but you got to do what you got to do to bring these people into the community of nations, which used to mean something and now doesn't really as much. I want to go back to the entire original premise where Donald Trump is not going to lecture anyone about chopping up Khashoggi. You know what? The United States did, and of course it didn't mean anything. You feel like you have to, but then a couple months later, we were doing business with the Saudis because of course we're going to do business with the Saudis. Look at our decades of lecturing the Chinese on human rights. It didn't get anyone anywhere, right? It didn't help Hong Kong. Would not have doing it changed anything either? No, probably not. The question is, the idea, though, that if you dispense with that, then you can finally get to the real stuff, the stuff that we all want. Are we sure about that? Are we sure that in the United States' interest, an amorality, and I'm thinking, in fact, of Russia and Ukraine. Let's just be amoral. Let's just look at what's going on in this conflict and not put it in the terms of an aggressor state and an underdog. And those terms are really there and easy to reach for. It's hard not to reach for them. But if we just talk about it amorally, I think there is a good strategic amoral case for opposing Russia and actually helping the Ukrainians in that matter. And being amoral, or as Trump defines amorality, isn't actually helping the United States' interest in that sphere of the world. What do you think?
I just want to say I agree with that 100%. And look, I think there's lots of reasons to morally oppose what Russia is doing in Ukraine. But there's even greater political and strategic reasons to oppose what they're doing.
We'd be stupid not to, is my point.
One of the things I have found sort of mind-boggling about, and I wrote about this a couple of months ago, is that, one thing that's happened in the Ukraine war is that we have supplied Ukraine with billions of dollars worth of weapons they have used to significantly weaken militarily one of our key geopolitical rivals. Why would we want to stop doing that? I mean, as long as Ukraine wants to keep fighting, I mean, I keep seeing this argument from the Trump administration that, well, we want to end the war, we want to end the bloodletting. And I want to end the war too, but you have to end the war in terms that are reasonable to both sides. And as long as Ukraine wants to continue to fight and continue to resist Russian aggression, I'm not sure why it isn't in our interest to support them. I don't understand actually what the benefit is of a lousy peace deal that sells out Ukraine and benefits Russia. just for the sake of stopping the war. I don't actually see the benefit of that. And I mean, you can call me,
No, I agree. Absent any
Realpolitik,
moral consideration, I agree.
I think look, the moral side of the conflict, and I think Eli and I will agree on this, is on the Ukrainian side. There's no question about that. The Russians are the bad guys here, okay? And if you want to make a deal, I want to see a deal. I want to see the war end also, but I want to see it on terms that basically benefit Russia. I want to see it on terms that allows Ukraine to be able to survive. And
and also, we as Americans shouldn't have to care more about the lives of Russian soldiers than the leader of Russia does. That's not incumbent upon us.
That also, yes. Yeah. And so I guess, I mean, I hate to sound like a Henry Kissinger clone here, and I don't think I do, but maybe partially.
Do the accent.
I can't do it. Whenever Jackson just sounds like my dog.
It wasn't a secret to the Cambodians when we bombed them.
There you go. Excellent. Right. I mean, look, I just think that at the end of the day, we are benefiting from what is happening in this war. We are helping, and we are on the right, and we're morally on the right side, and we are strategically on the right side. And Trump's entire approach, I feel like, is that he wants to make a deal for the sake of making a deal. He wants a deal so he can get a Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's what he actually believes will happen. So he's been pressuring Ukraine because I guess he thinks, and I think correctly, we have more leverage over Ukraine. But the result of that is to give Russia a great deal and really demand nothing in return. And as you've seen in the past 4 or 5 months, he's got nothing back from Russia in return. Nothing.
Yeah, Eli, do you agree with Michael and I?
Can I address your original
assessment?
question? Because I do think that there's strategic value in making the moral case. So the first point I would make is that when a president decides that human rights and democracy are important in the list of kind of issues or things that we negotiate with other countries, then that's a point of leverage. So even from a cynical perspective, if you add another thing that you care about, then it helps you maybe get some other things. Second point, though, is that, I don't think it's never been successful. When Ronald Reagan, it's not the only reason, but when Ronald Reagan decided to name names like Václav Havel or, Natan Sharansky or Lech Walesa in the, twilight of the Cold War, that had a real effect on not only the dissidents, but the populations themselves. And the president was saying these things. It mattered. It meant that their struggle wasn't in vain. They weren't just resisting in the void. And it wasn't, as I said, I'm not a monocausal guy. It wasn't the only reason why the Soviet Union collapsed, but it certainly helped that there were people who, as to use the great phrase from Solzhenitsyn, would not let the lie go through them. And there was an American president who recognized that. So I don't think I think that there are times when it does work. I mean, I can tell you, having lived in Egypt at the time, when George W. Bush decided to make a big deal about political prisoners in Egypt, it meant that they were released, and Mubarak understood that he got more than $2 billion a year in military aid from the United States, and he had to do something about that. Doesn't always work. The concerns that we had about human rights abuses in Pakistan certainly didn't persuade the military dictatorship regime over there to do anything about it. But at the same time, just because it doesn't work all the time doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So again, I say it's sort of like to a point. You can take this stuff too far, and if it leads you into a kind of it's the end of history and we're going to remake the world in our image and we're going to we're do it because we're the most powerful country in the world, that was a mistake. And I do think that to a certain extent, fine, critique that. I just think he's overcorrecting in this particular way. So
it's just his nature. And
of course it's his nature. Yes, I agree.
And by the way, to pick up on Eli's point, I want to say one thing. You said a second ago, Mike, that on human rights in China, we had no effect on that issue in China. I don't think that's true, actually. We spent decades, after, through the 90s and in the aughts, basically raising the issue of human rights in China, and it did have an effect on human rights in China. Not as dramatically as we would have liked, but it does have an impact. And I think Eli is right that we should keep talking about it because it does give us a certain amount of leverage. And Trump has clearly decided he doesn't care at all, and he's not going to talk about it.
I don't know. Right. I don't think there's one.
It's like the way we used to talk about World War II. It was like, well, we had to make an alliance with Joseph Stalin because the Nazis, right? But it's like Trump would just make an alliance with Joseph Stalin. He doesn't need the Nazis.
Great head of hair.
Yeah, so, right.
I want to ask you one thing. I want to ask you. What a name!
He puts on a hell of a trial. Hell of a show trial.
Very strong.
Joe.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, Eli, this is an interesting complication. So lest people think Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, throws away any requirement that they adhere to human rights, and therefore it's game on with everything the Saudis want. Oh, no, no, no. Weeks before, he did a handshake deal with the Houthis based on, I think, some input from the Vance Hegseth side of things. But I think a driving consideration was it was costing too much to bomb the Houthis, and maybe not getting there, or getting there as his generals would have taken way too long. Now, it is in the Saudis' interest. The Houthis are their great enemy in Yemen. It is in the Saudis' interest to keep attacking the Houthis. What's your analysis of the pullback of the administration, and if you know anything about what the Saudis think about that?
I think at this point the Saudis are, they're looking at the American political situation, and I think they, in some ways, are torn between wanting to cover their bets. So if there's a way to kind of reach an accommodation with Iran, because it's really Iran that's the, source of all this stuff. And on the other hand, it's like, you know what, like, I don't know how close really, I mean, Trump seems to think they're close to joining the Abraham Accords. But that would be a huge thing. We just saw the reporting in the Wall Street Journal that that was one of the primary motivators of October 7th. So that would be a nice rebuke or a nice bookend to this sort of chapter in Middle East history. But I think the Saudis, to a certain extent, are themselves divided. But it's one guy, really. It's MBS. And the thing, I just want to give, MBS is by no means perfect. I know that's an understatement, but he has done some modernization that all the other Saudi leaders before him refused to do. He has
some
done
low-hanging dates there, right?
What?
There were some low-hanging dates
listen,
in terms of modernization.
I'm just saying, you weren't allowed to say this, but he has. There are movie theaters in Saudi Arabia, and that was him. He's done something about some of the really extreme Wahhabist, imams that were kind of cultivated by Saudi Arabia, although they largely exported this poison, this ideological poison abroad. But he's done something about that. They kind of understand that they could no longer play that double game that the Saudis would play, which is, behave at home, but, go crazy outside of Saudi Arabia. And that was a huge dilemma, as Michael, you and I both know. After 9/11, what do you do about this Janus-faced ally? Well, finally, we have a younger leader, the Crown Prince, who's willing to do something about it. So it's, in some ways, it's not like it's a more complicated picture with him. And the other thing you said earlier, I think is just worth saying. I don't agree that Trump has given Israel the cold shoulder. I think I'm just saying. No, and I'll tell you why. Okay. One, he sold all the weapons that were being held up by Biden. That was one of the first things he did. Second of all, it's night and day. He's not micromanaging what Netanyahu does on Gaza. At least we haven't seen that. It's as opposed to under Biden. So I think they've just opened the border, but they closed the border for 3 months, in terms of aid deliveries and so forth.
Yeah, and that was an insistence of the Trump administration.
Yeah, but I think not going to Israel on this trip was a pretty clear sign.
Yeah, but you could argue that if he didn't have deliverables or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think the substance of the policy yet suggests to me that it's a cold shoulder for Israel, and then followed up by the fact that the new line, at least, and maybe it'll change, is no enrichment. And that, I think, is that's the Israeli position, of course, and it seems to be the U.S. position now.
Well, I think the other issue is that on the Houthis, they made this deal with Houthis to stop basically attacking them and did not request that they stop bombing Israel. I think it's also some of Witkoff's statements. I don't have a lot of confidence in Witkoff, but he did say this recently that, he thinks that maybe you should end the war. And I think it's clear they want to end the war. Now, again, they don't want to end the war because they're worried about Palestinians being killed. They could give a rat's ass about that. They just care about he wants to make a deal. And all I'm saying is I think he would sell out the Israelis in a heartbeat if he thought he could make a deal that would make Donald Trump look good. And so I think that there was a belief in Israel that Trump will be better for us than Biden or Harris. And I talked to Israelis about this, and the attitude there is this is not what we expected to get from Trump. I think they are surprised at the lack of support that he's been providing to Bibi.
All right. If you really want the cold shoulder, I'd recommend you go to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, depending on their refrigeration capacity at the time. And now I will apologize
That is
for
dark, man.
the worst joke
dark.
ever. And I will say it's time to do goat grinders. These are the things that grind our gears or get our goat. And will you bring me out of this morass, Eli Lake? Do you want to start first with what's grinding your goat these days?
Okay, I can't choose between two because I have so many goats that have been grinding my gears.
Give me two, and we'll put one in the bonus.
Okay, so my first one, they're Israel related. I would point everybody to a story that the Council on American Islamic Relations recently sort of worked to pressure the disinvitation to Salman Rushdie at. Is it Claremont? I think it's Claremont or Pomona. One of those. They're all related. Those schools for their commencement address, and
they're related. They're sisters, but Claremont is very different from Pomona.
It's the Claremont Graduate Center. That's the right wing Leo Straussian, the West Coast Straussians. But anyway, this to me is it grinds my gears because recently CARE has kind of wrapped itself in the First Amendment and claimed to be a free speech organization. And here they are, on the other hand, basically using, as a pressure group to try their best to, prevent somebody from speaking on a college campus. Pick a lane, okay? I happen to be a real free speech nut myself. So even though I don't agree with anything Mahmoud Khalil said, I wrote a column saying that it was wrong for this administration to effectively not even grant him due process and try to deport him for what appears to be speech crimes unless they provide the evidence otherwise. I laid it out. You can all look it up. We could link to it. Okay. But then you turn. So in that particular case, CARE and lots of other groups that are kind of on the pro-Palestinian side, all are about free speech and that the Israel lobby is trying to censor us and everything like that. And then they turn around and do it again. So what you're saying is pick a lane, guys. If you're free speech, be about it. Don't just use the tactics, when it's convenient, because you're not seriously free speech. I would say the same thing, by the way, to people who are on the pro-Israel side who want to use efforts to try to suppress speech. My second bonus goat grinder, getting back to, and I thought about it as we were having our
goat upon a goat.
having our conversation today, is that
goat on goat
there
action
are so
right
many
here.
because I'm in agreement with Michael Cohen about the justness of the Ukrainian cause, and that Russia, of course, are the bad guys. Is that it seems that a large number of the most vitriolic voices against Israel in the present Gaza war also were on Assad's side and Putin's side in these other conflicts. So to me, it's like you're automatically discredited if, you're going to give me an argument about October 7th is, part of the right of resistance for all occupied peoples. And then you're actually, Ukraine provoked the war and Putin's totally right. And if Ukraine wasn't trying to get into NATO, then this would have never happened. And I'll name names, Aaron Maté, Max Blumenthal. There's a number of people, both left and right, by the way, now, who are kind of in this weird space where they defend Putin and at the same time are crying tears for Gaza. So in my view, you can't have been somebody who defends Assad and thinks he was conducting legitimate counterterrorism operations and then, turn around and sort of say Israel has zero right to respond to October 7th.
Their organization, the Gray Zone, I just don't understand why it's not treated like Der Stürmer or something, or have that level of. I'm not even talking about Al Jazeera. I'm not talking about what is it?
Right.
Who's the guy? Mehdi Hassan. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about 3 or 4 levels down to a level of just disrepute that is unrivaled.
Yes.
This is how bad Gray Zone is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty
Michael
bad.
Cohen, you got to go grinder.
All right, so this is kind of a larger thing, but I'm just using an anecdote first. I was watching something on Twitter the other day. I saw some clip of Andy Beshear's governor of Kentucky, who was maybe ready for president, and he said, we Democrats, we need to talk to Americans like we're normal human beings.
Yeah.
And I heard this and I thought, have you ever heard Donald Trump talk to Americans? He doesn't talk like a normal human being, and he does fine politically. And this gets to a larger thing that really drives me crazy, and it's driven me crazy for the last 6 months, is every single postmortem of the 2024 campaign, almost all of which seem to be wrong, which is that and they're wrong all in the same way, because the verdict of what went wrong, what needs to change, is almost completely like the Venn diagram is like a perfect circle of what went wrong and here are and what we need to do differently, and here are my ideological priors. And I just would like people to acknowledge that this was a very close loss, that every incumbent party in the world lost voter share in 2024, that there was a global anti-incumbent wave that swept up the Democratic Party in it, and that is the best explanation for what happened in 2024. There wasn't some big vibe check. There wasn't some, enormous embrace of Trump, although I think that was part of it. This was an anti-incumbent, people pissed off about the economy, and so much of the postmortems that we are seeing are not only wrong, but they are useless, because 3 years from now, when there's another presidential election, we're talking about a whole different set of issues. We're not talking about trans rights. We're not talking about immigration. We're not talking about Joe Biden's health. Hopefully he's still alive then. Those issues will not be on the table. The issues will be about Donald Trump. And if they're not about Donald Trump, or J.D. Vance, whoever's going to replace him as the Republican nominee, then Democrats are screwed, because that ultimately is how they're going to get back into power, not rerunning the supposed mistake or addressing the supposed mistakes that they made in November of 2024. That's not how it's going to work. It never works that way. So please stop with the election postmortems. This will play itself out. We'll figure it out. We'll see where this is going. Democrats don't need to rebrand themselves. They just need to be opposed to Trump for the next year and a half, and they'll be fine. And then we'll worry about 2028 when it comes around. Stop.
Look, I agree with some of what you said. I disagree. But if this gets the abundance agenda off some of my podcasts, I co-sign with that. But I can't dislike Brat.
You think Americans like illegal immigration? Is that like your?
I think
they're fine with it.
I think they don't like it, but I don't actually think it's the reason why Trump won, and I do not think it will be the number one issue in 2028.
Because Trump will have solved it.
I'm going to, in a rare, not even mad moment of agreement, I think your point that you made in your Substack and that you're making now, that like we don't know what the issues of 2028 are, and those issues are like it's like preparing for the next war by fighting the last one.
You're fighting the last war.
Right. And I do think that there is a little bit of Maginot Line thinking, and I think that's a totally fair point, because there will be a whole different set of issues. You're right. And we can't predict the future. Everything moves very fast. So part of that's fair. But my little slight pushback is just like, I do think that there were a bunch of issues where the Democrats were in like 2080 territory. And I mean, I wouldn't even say it's like, the idea that like, I mean, my view is like, I think most Americans are like, all right, trans people should be treated with dignity. But it was like youth gender medicine. It was like trans in sports. And those were cultural hot button issues that are like 80-20. And if the orthodoxy of the party prevents the, nominee from just saying, I'm not with that, then I do think it's a problem. But I also see your point that there's going to be new set of issues. Runaway inflation, who knows? But there's going to be a whole new set of issues for 2028.
I guess the one thing I'll just say before I know you have to finish up, the one thing I'll mention that is that in the places where Kamala Harris, people saw her the most, where her campaign was the most visible, where attack ads against her were the most visible, is the places where she did the best in 2024. Right? She outran the national numbers in the swing states. She did better in the swing states than she did elsewhere in the country.
What about that stat? Like she hadn't done better in every county. She did worse than
that was not true. I know that came out right after she was not true. There were a number of places. I mean, like for example, in Georgia she did better than Biden. North Carolina she did better than Biden. And I would make this point too about this isn't a Democratic problem as much as look, there were 4 states where she lost and Democratic senators won. So Democrats, maybe it was a Kamala Harris problem, maybe it was a pro-Donald Trump vote, but you can't argue that Democrats have this horrible branding problem when in 4 places where Trump won, their Senate candidates prevailed. So I just think that we just get caught up in these like monocausal narratives about what happens in elections, and they're almost always wrong. The answer is always much simpler and less counterintuitive than I think we even imagine. I mean, this is just elections are complicated, and there's never a single
Voters hate joy. That's it.
I'm sorry.
Voters hate joy.
Look, the last 3 elections have been backlash elections. I'm not sure why the next one won't be either. But
what was your point? Wait, she did better than Biden in Georgia? I missed your point.
She got more raw votes in Georgia, in North Carolina.
Okay, but she didn't win Georgia the way
No, she lost Georgia,
she got more
and
votes.
Biden won.
She got more votes than Biden did in North Carolina, Georgia. I'm forgetting where else. Maybe Michigan.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
Michigan.
Lost those states
But she lost
Biden
them.
won.
Right, and my argument in part is that and there's a new catalyst. There's a new survey out that everyone should check out that sort of suggests that one of the big reasons why Trump won is because he turned out occasional voters. People who only voted for Trump and didn't vote down the line for Republicans, which, by the way, is going to be a big problem for the Republican Party in 2028 when
All
he's
right,
not on the ticket.
Let me lay my goat grinder on you, much more cultural, less political. But it was inspired by a clip I heard in Eli Lake's most recent podcast where he was talking about Lenny Bruce. He played a clip of the movie Lenny with Dustin Hoffman as Lenny Bruce. And Dustin Hoffman was, tell me, Eli, nominated or won the Academy Award for that performance?
I don't know. I know he's nominated. I'd have to check.
I don't think he won.
I think you're
he
right.
was nominated.
Right. So great performance, and yet terrible performance because as a comedian, he doesn't come across like someone actually doing actual comedy. And in fact, this is my goat grinder. I do not think any comedian who has ever been given scripted comedy, or I should say it this way. I do not think any actor who has ever been given a script and said, your character is a comedian, now perform this stand-up comedy, has ever actually done a good job. It might seem like a good job. It might serve the logic or the structure of that particular film or TV show, but it's just not comedy. And the examples I could think of are every single one, but Lenny is one. The show Hacks, it works, or some of the jokes that the Joan Rivers standing character, Deborah Vance, delivers, quote unquote, work, but they wouldn't work and they wouldn't actually get a laugh from a crowd. The Amazing Mrs. Maisel, who I love, who I think in many ways, Lenny Bruce is in that show. It's a good show. It doesn't really work as stand-up comedy. And what was my fourth example? I don't know. Fourth example, come to me. Luckily, we could cut this. Oh, and Punchline.
Now, I was going to say I thought that one works. I think Tom Hanks is pretty funny in that movie.
Tom Hanks is as good. He's great in the movie. He seems like an 80s comic, but it doesn't work as stand-up comedy, and here's why. Oh, okay. Because stand-up comedy is not really an actorly performance. The actor can't make the choice. The audience makes the choice. And no actor on stage or on film will ever let someone else, including the audience, make the choice. It's anathema to the craft. But the craft of comedy is doing what you can to try to get around what's funny, and then the audience will tell you which slight gesture, which change in intonation, which cadence break that is unexpected will get the laugh. And if you do the actual thing that would actually make an audience laugh, it will seem weird in a film or a TV show. So that is my goat grinder. It never works. There's no fault of anyone's, but it is just the truth.
I like Dustin Hoffman's performance in the movie as but I also agree with you that you're right. It's ineffable. It's hard to know.
Yes. And stand-up comedy is a weird thing. It's like 90% art and 10% focus group.
Yeah.
And there's really no way around it. And it's kind of nice, though, that is how we connect via laughter. Like, we have to literally connect with the people right there in the room. All right. Let me just have this in my script. All right. Well, I want to thank you both. My guests have been Michael A. Cohen and Eli Lake. You could see and read them in the Truth and Consequence Substack. Maybe we could call it a Substack. And Eli's writing and doing a podcast for the Free Press. And we are saying that, we're definitely not saying that any of us are right. We're not saying that you're right. All we're saying is we're not even mad.